For years, brands have talked about overhauling their supply chain strategies. The pandemic took that talk and turned it into action plans. Everyone recognized the growing shift from chasing price to increasing agility. However, in 2020, we also saw the clear and present need to factor resiliency into the equation. However, to actually make those moves is a complicated process with both potential rewards and risks. What is the optimal or most realistic way to achieve this, given current market conditions? I'm Jane Singer, and welcome to A Seat at the Table. Each week, I sit down with industry leaders, entrepreneurs, educators, and innovators who share their expertise, experience, and vision for the future. One of the leaders in innovative supply chain strategy is Luca Suriano, VP Global Sourcing, Apparel and Accessories at Under Armour. Luca saw the opportunity in digitization and has led Under Armour in a bold new direction that leverages data to drive better sourcing efficiency. Currently, he's pioneering a vision that balances the advantage of speed and responsiveness with the growing need for resiliency. Before we get started, if you're looking to develop knitwear collections that will be bestsellers both online and offline, then Spin Expo is the place to go. It's the primary exhibition for yarn and knitwear. The fair offers a carefully curated selection of high-quality yarns and knitwear that's bursting with creativity, not to mention outstanding trend information that cannot be found anywhere else. You can learn more at www.spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. There's also a link in the show notes. I'm pleased to share that A Seat at the Table now has its own website. You can find all of the podcast episodes there, the show notes, and lots of other useful information. You can find it at www.seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Now let's sit down with Luca and talk about supply chain strategy. I'm totally delighted to have you on the podcast, Luca. I think that our global audience will be so excited to hear what you have to share, and certainly myself and many other people are big Under Armour fans.
We all are. It has been a very difficult moment, but I think looking forward, we still see some clouds, but I would say overall we feel extremely strong to be in the right path and with the right map in our hands. So it's extremely encouraging, the direction we're going. So we're extremely excited about it.
Due to the pandemic and brewing trade tensions for more agility to rethink our supply chains, some of that is sort of long overdue because to some extent people have put too much in certain markets, and there has always been that risk factor which has been driven home more recently. So I think that to actually make these moves, right, is a complicated process. It's easy to talk about moving a supply chain, but it has its rewards and it also has its risks. When you're looking at all the challenges that you face managing a global supply chain, which part is keeping you awake at night? Which is the most problematic?
I think it's luckily we're not concerned anymore about having a sleepless night because basically we know that overall there is this pretty heavy pressure on the entire supply chain. So I would say that at this point in time, we know that pressure is something we have to cope with. And it was, back in the days, the time between new information came and the actual consequences were actually there. There was a lag of time that we were allowed to think and plan and have risk associated to it. But I would say what is happening today in the previous administration is something that has proven from the tweet moment to the moment that everybody was overreacting to the situation. I think that actually has changed a lot how we manage this reaction situation. And what I would say that hopefully this is going away and it's going to recover to the normal. But I think that if I remember back then when probably was in December that the administration was considering Vietnam as a potential duty, I think that was an example of how things could quickly escalate overnight. So the other thing I would say at the moment, it's this general situation of uncertainty because of COVID. That COVID is everywhere because clearly it's still a global pandemic, but we don't know how each country is managing the situation, and cases could go very quickly up, and this means that suddenly the supply chain is impacted. So
right.
I think that in the past, when it was more confined, we could still manage to find a mitigation strategy. Right now, because it's global, I think we just have to live and cope with it. So what I would say is this is probably, we're trying as best as we can to stay on top of it. And we were really observing different media set and data set that are helping us to predict how things are escalating quicker than slower. But I would say that this is what is, being reactive today is extremely important to, because it will allow us to have the short term flexibility to mitigate things.
Right. Yeah, I think that's what many, many people are talking about right now, right? It's a matter of being agile, being resilient, being not only just in time, but ahead of time in some cases. And not easy to do, right? Not easy to see clearly what direction things are taking.
Yeah, I think that the beauty of managing supply chain at the moment, and I have to see it this positively, it's actually knowing that we have a very strong backbone, and this is a solid foundation for us to lever a different situation. And a different situation could be that the market is changing or the supply is changing. And while we were, for the first couple of weeks when the whole pandemic happened, we had to really assess what was working and what was still as a project or a plan. I think right now we know exactly how much we can lever on each and every solutions that we have. And I think this is the beauty of managing a global network, which is a multitude of supply chains put together. And there are pros and cons. There are speed and that they work in different way. But I think that this is the power of instead of looking at this as a multiple risk or multiple things that could go wrong, how we look at it in a positive way, those are all different type of solutions we can implement. And I think this gives right now, I believe supply chain is the most common world that it's been utilized when I read in our business papers. And I think that this is the power that right now company are actually realizing, that there is a lot of value in managing the supply chain.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think that supply chain has gone from being, I don't want to say the less glamorous part of the business, but I think it's certainly been elevated to C suite priority.
Absolutely, it is. It has definitely a seat at the table, and it's actually now a very powerful seat because it is able to shift things around, to really turn things that are not going in the right direction to make it additional opportunities. We're talking about fast and slow in supply chain. Before it was just one batch that had to go, and right now we're talking about different speed model. And some others mention multi product, different type of solutions that can actually give the front end different way of managing consumer expectation. And I think this is the beauty, having multiple solutions is what makes brands extremely strong today to compete with one another.
I think that's a really interesting point because I think that, as you said previously, people had one plan, one strategy, and having multiple different tracks that you can shift in and out of as need be certainly gives you a lot greater resilience.
Absolutely. It used to be the race of finding the cheaper place. And today, what I would say is we have so much data in the supply chain that we actually know exactly how many minutes it takes to make the garment and which country is better than others. So all this visibility wasn't there 10, 15, 20 years ago. Today, we have that advantage. And we also know at the same time what is happening from a risk management perspective. We know from a raw material perspective where is the best place to have things made. So all this information that are synchronized in one tool and managed, I think you can understand for yourself how powerful that becomes as a tool to use as a competitive advantage for brands to outplace competition. And before it was only based on product and innovation. I'm not saying that it isn't today, but there's an additional lever today that brands can use, and we feel very strong about it.
I think that's really important. When you're looking at whether it be from the data or from hands-on experience, when you're looking at things that are slowing things down, what do you see at the moment? Where are the biggest speed bumps?
To really answer to the question of what could slow us down, it's take that leap of faith towards data. Because what I notice is that we have the tendency as the same that happened when GPS was introduced, to always try to cross correct and be better than the data, be better than the signal. And it's funny enough because I remember very well 15 years ago when this was actually the situation. And today is the same with data. We try as much as possible to observe, to pick the right data, to observe the right data, to aggregate them, and to have artificial intelligence that is helping us to calculate in the best possible way. And then when the solution is in front of us, so we have doubts. And I think this is probably the biggest pitfall that we could do. Or, I believe it's an education that we need to take a step at a time in learning how to deal with data and how to manage data. But if we decide that path, and by the way, from my perspective, it's absolutely necessary to do because the return are so much higher, we basically have to agree that we need to trust the system. We have to trust the process and the data, because that's how do we drive that additional 30-40% results that wasn't even contemplated before.
Right. That's interesting. I think that that's something that our industry in particular, the apparel and footwear supply chain, has lagged other industries on. So it's interesting that, you are bringing this to the forefront and pointing out the value in this.
Absolutely. And again, I wasn't the one starting the whole process of outsourcing. I believe it was in the 80s, when opportunities were rising and, China was opening up. So, but I believe that back then we were quickly replicating what we knew, and we tried as much as possible to do a good job, right? But cost of labor, because we are in an industry that is very labor intensive, was basically the solutions. And there was a big significant gap between the labor we could get in the Western world that was producing until that moment and the Far East. So that basically allowed a lot of inefficiency to come into the play, because believe it or not, factories in the 70s and the 80s in the Western Hemisphere, they were very efficient. And all of a sudden, we arrive in the Far East, and the efficiency was not anymore a point of discussion, because all of a sudden, labor benefit, cost of labor was predominant. Today, we're finally back, and I think we're doing a much better job today, starting from Far East, and I'm quoting China and Vietnam in particular, where automation is now part of the conversation, not even a discussion. There is a mix of great best practice adopted from automotive on having a lean manufacturing, clean floor, Six Sigma, you name it. I mean, it's all there. And I think that this is where, it makes the strength of this new way of managing factories, managing supply chains. And this is why now attaching data is the next step to make sure that we are able to read 24/7 what is happening across the globe, and take advantage from that and use that as a lever to get that additional 25-30% value out of it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And it's interesting, yeah, that you were pointing out that we did have that greater efficiency, but we sort of went for price over efficiency because at that point in time, the price was so much cheaper that it actually was more advantageous than the efficiency. And now it's sort of come full circle.
It was, and I think I admire the entire industry to have done that circle and to have come today to a better place. And this is part of the evolution, and this is part also how great the process was, not to go only for profit, but companies have been extremely cognizant of making sure that we do not only go to a third world country and exploit it, but let's bring innovation, let's bring social standard, let's bring a better place. So I'm actually very proud that this is now hands in hands with the progress of each and every country that is supporting us in this global supply chain.
Yeah, I think that's really good. And you're right. It's now about working with these countries, working with these manufacturers in order to elevate everybody.
Absolutely. That's
So
the goal.
the pandemic has forced most companies to make changes in order to survive. And sometimes those changes have actually been for the better. It's pushed people in a direction that they hadn't wanted to go or hadn't thought about going, but it's actually ended up moving things in a better direction. From the point of view of your business, have you seen such things?
Absolutely, absolutely. What I mentioned in the beginning, I believe that we had a number of things that were already working, a number of things that were just a project, and some were maybe an idea when this whole thing started. And I can mention the 3D, I can mention of the digitalization of supply chain, the resiliency of the supply chain. They were all in different progress. And we didn't know exactly where everything was because we never had the need to test everything at the same time. But probably end of February 2020, beginning of March, this is we turned everything on. And I'm very proud that we can call it a win and see that the entire system was working, regardless if something was in an early stage, medium stage, or more mature stage. We made everything work at the same time in a matter of 60 to 90 days.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, exactly.
That's
And
very fast.
it was, and I say the teammates turn around and they pivot, working from home at the highest level of efficiency, and the factory have pivoted. And after a few lockdown here and there, they were back on track with distancing and measuring temperature and raw material the same. The supply chain they show it's extremely a resilient play. Of course, we had delays, but we already had a plan how to catch up those delays and how to counter source and how to. So everything came at the same time as a solution instead of adding up on the issue list. And the issue list became more of a work in progress. This is what we have to work today to fix it, and we did a very good reprioritization. And we probably learned very much from working around the clock and making sure that we were very much synchronized with the front end, which is sitting in Baltimore, and together with our global presence, I think we did a fantastic job, and the results talk for themselves. So I would say that it is taking that leap of faith and testing the system and realizing the system is actually pretty good, and that resilience showed up. So again, extremely proud of what the team and the partners have been putting together because the results were extremely positive.
Oh, that's outstanding. I think that, it's really almost been a proving ground, right, for various companies to see who was really agile and resilient and could pull themselves together and which ones really had, severe structural weaknesses.
100%. You can say that, and I actually can echo and very proudly say that we were able to stay ahead of the game. And in many fronts, depending on what the issue was, I think there is no one where we were just doing okay. I think the entire results that we have witnessed were above the standards for sure.
So everyone is talking about wanting greater agility. What do you see as the optimal way or the most realistic way to achieve that in the current market, under current market circumstances? And what's the thing that's making that most challenging?
Yeah, I would say that it is clearly the what has happened in the past year. This in the past we were analyzing the VUCA structure, right? Understanding what it's more what is something that can be predicted, what is something can be foreseen, what is volatile, and the different aspect of this model. And what I would say is we woke up in early 2020 that all of them were happening at the same time and throughout the year.
Wow.
So yeah, exactly. So what I would say is today we're cognizant that this is an option, that this can happen again. Before we didn't even believe it because we either had one issue or the other, and they
Right.
were very spaced out in the years. We had the trade war for sure, but we had the increase of cost of cotton, if I remember well, in the early 2011. So
Yes.
things were very spaced out, and they enable us to work around it. All of a sudden, 2020 showed that it could also happen at the same time. So agility was the answer for sure, but what I would recommend brands to think about it cannot only be supply chain agility because running 100% of a supply chain in an agile way is very expensive because it means that everything is programmed to be called out at the last second, and that's extremely expensive. So I foresee that, as we were mentioning before, there will be a mix. Something that is predictable and foreseeable will constitute the base of the supply chain, will run smoothly, probably across the globe to optimize the logistic movement. The second is probably a part of business that is done in collaboration with the key customer, key partner that are willing to share and invest in co-creation now that it becomes digital and work hands in hands. And the last piece is just something that it's magic if it's there, and if it's not there, it means that it needs to be another experiment, and perhaps it could be a failure, and perhaps not. And I think as long as we all know what each and every segment is, how each and every segment works, I think that this is the strength of the supply chain, and that the brand can take benefit from. Knowing that there is an open to buy of X amount of dollars that could come from this area or could not, and depends on the weather, depends on the customer, depends on competition. I think this makes it even more interesting and exciting to compete and to really, show up how our customer wants to receive our products and innovate it in the best way. And I think that this makes it extremely challenging, and we want to make sure that we are ready for those challenges. But as you can imagine, this can be for a certain percentage of the business. It cannot be for the entire 100%, unless the business is built in that way. Then the cost model has to be replicated, and so on and so forth. So I think it gave us really the visibility that how many things could happen, and what do we need to be ready for, and how do we need to prepare the supply chain to support this type of business model.
So what you're saying is that you try to keep about 30% of your open to buy to be very customer centric, to be very responsive to what that customer wants at any given moment.
The concept is correct. The percentage, not yet, not exactly, meaning that different regions have different strategies, and they will take too much time to take you through this. But what I would say, the concept is exactly what you just described. Becoming customer centric means exactly this: that there is something that we are foreseeing that the customer needs, but there is something else we want to make sure that we co-create with our partners, and there is something we want to delight it and surprise it by the market, depending on which direction, which innovation we have ready, and it's discovered basically on the last mile. And we internally we call it the front side flip, which is basically taking this ability to understand what really happens in the market in 3 months from today, and make sure that we are ready for exactly what the market needed. And this was not prepared a year in advance, booking in advance, forecasted in advance. This is just left for the market to decide, and for us to be ready to supply. So this is the beauty of the evolution of the benefit of having lived through COVID. I think that it made us realize that we actually can use this as a lever.
Right. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think that it has been a wake up call, and it's been a catalyst, right, to push through certain kinds of change that people had only talked about but hadn't implemented for a variety of reasons.
Correct. And again, a little bit of pride that we did it, and we did it successfully, and we feel strong about it. And now we're going to build on top of this. We're not going to leave it just to COVID and the year after COVID. This is the proudly the new way of working that can actually be a better way of working.
Yeah, it sounds like it's really catapulted you into a much stronger and better position.
Absolutely. And what I would say is, digital has played a big game there. Now,
Right.
we did it basically holding hands and trying our best. And I think now is the moment where we look at, okay, which one are the solutions that we want to keep there, and which one are the one that probably were not the best, and that they need to be revisited, and how technology can help us. Because I think that ultimately what we want to see is our teammate, which are the most important thing, using their genius to think of new solutions and keep on iterating that process, and letting probably part of the processes either to be dismissed if it's not necessary, or decide together how can be automated. I think that's another horizon that we're looking at, because I think with today, partnering and being closer to each another inside of the supply chain with the vendor and the customers, how instead of replicating the processes by passing information over and over, how this can become with one central point of information, and everybody is taking from the same and elaborating on it, and driving the value out of the same information. So that's more or less, I believe, the vision where the industry, but in particular Under Armour, could be heading to.
Oh, yeah, I think it sounds really, it's very exciting to see things going in that direction. And I think it's just been talked about for so long, and now to see that companies like Under Armour are actually executing on it and executing on it successfully is really exciting.
Absolutely, very proud.
When you look at diversifying your supply chain, which is something everybody is talking about and has been, and certainly with the past year's events, you can understand why there's a lot more pressure to make those moves. What do you see as some of the up and coming places for production if you were looking out 3 to 5 years? Where do you see places that look like, wow, this place is starting to emerge and looks, this could be important?
Yeah, it's something that for sure we are always looking at what is the next heaven. But we also made us realize that there is no such a place, because what we realize is that the resiliency was built in countries where we were there for a very long time, when we had our partners that knew left and right what was happening. And in particular, I think that the most important thing, it's the infrastructure. Infrastructure means that things are happening at the highest level of efficiency. And this is where we want to operate. So I would say that today, because what we mentioned earlier in being responsive and having different model set up at the same time, when a brand like Under Armour has a global presence, we have to think on a global and regional and then local scale. And a local scale means that there are countries where we need to have local for local, which means let's call it China for China. But there is also a region can be served. For example, the APAC needs to be more and more served, and I think we are at 95% by the region of APAC. And the same happened for Europe and EMEA, and the same happened for the US. And each and every region needs to have a strategy that is making sure that the efficiency is there and the results are there and the speed is there. So what I would say is, instead of the next country, we need to learn and invest in the next capability, and making sure that every region is learning from each other and using best practice that we might have in one area and bring it across the other area. Because there is no such a thing, and especially also for the CO2 emission, that we're going to continue to move things left and right. We're going to come to a conclusion that we need to think of a global cost, and we need to think of an end-to-end lead time. And if that would be in the future 45 days, let's call it 45 days. So how do we build supply chain that can actually function in 45 days? How do we build a supply chain that can function in 3 weeks delivery to customer? So I think now that we know how strong our capabilities are, is now the time for us to, as I was mentioning before, use our genius to go after the solution that we don't even think are possible today. But we actually, by exploring, we're going to turn them around and make it possible.
Right. Yeah, I think that's an important way of looking at things, because previously people were looking at it from a different point of view, mainly on cost, to some extent on efficiency. But I think that you're bringing such an interesting perspective to this. Do you see any countries that stand out in your mind? I mean, I know that previously China was the gold standard, and now people feel like they don't want to be as reliant upon China. What places look like they could be moving up in terms of offering all the different things that you had talked about?
I was recently in Vietnam, and I have to say it checked all the boxes. I have to say that especially last year, Vietnam has invested so much. First of all, to have only 4 weeks of shutdown of the entire year, and I think that's the number one thing that, in my opinion, when I look at the resiliency of a country, I think that's the number one. And by the
Yeah.
way, I was able to travel around without the mask because the cases in the south were around 70 per day. So I think that was the number one. The number two, I would say I really much appreciated how the control on workers and the ability really to work together with the compliance and make sure that there was a mutual respect, and the very safety was number one in all the factory I visited. So I would say that also distinguished itself very much. And the third piece that I mentioned earlier, it's how much our business partners have invested in automation, and they put it in the right place and in the right process, and really to create value, not so much just to either show off or bring up capabilities, but they really put it there for a number of different reasons. How to create a leaner and faster takt time, and also to create better efficiency and improve the CMV. And I really impressed how the overall system worked in almost in a perfect musical sound. And if I think of Vietnam 10 years back, they were nowhere there. They were just, leveraging a lot the inexpensive labor force, and that was the reason. And I think today, seeing this makes me extremely proud what our partners have done, and this is exactly what, being European, I would say Europe hasn't done, because it was easier back then to jump on the next country instead of thinking how to re-engineer and bring the cost per minute down or the efficiency up. And I think that this is something I'm extremely proud. So what we are doing now, as I mentioned before, we're taking this best practice and we're going across the world to our other vendors and partners and say, this is the North Star. This is what we
Right.
want. This is today the North Star, and tomorrow is going to be the standard. So
Right.
let's work together on a path to get there, because this is extremely important.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point that you've now sort of set a new benchmark and a new set of criteria based on what you've achieved in Vietnam that now everybody else is going to have to live up to.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, if it's not working this way, we need to find another way, because it has to have a competitive advantage. There's no such a country, there's no such a vendor that they're just, working together and see what happens tomorrow. We bring it down the same we do with our teammates. Everybody should have a purpose, and the same for our vendor. What is their purpose? This is the question we ask them. What they want to be famous for, and when they have a seat at the table, it means that they have an answer. And this makes the relationship grow and continue to foster, because at the end of the game, the partnership is based on mutual interest and mutual respect. And if it's missing, then of course, it won't go very far. This is why we continue to iterate with our partners that this is extremely important.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting way also of looking at how you're working with some of your manufacturing partners. I think it's a new point of view.
Yes, it is if it's new. What I would say for us is not new anymore, because I think we took this. We have something called the operating model, and when Patrick Frisk came on board and Colin, and this is what they have been helping us with. And I would say that Under Armour is successfully turned around, and really now we're living by this principle. So I think this is what, again, makes us extremely proud that we know this is the right direction, and we know we can have so much opportunities from following this direction.
You've shared so many interesting things. One last question. Suppliers are always trying to add value by offering new services. What services ideally would you love to see your suppliers offer? What would your ideally best suppliers be doing? Either whether they're suppliers of materials or the finished product. What ideally could they do better to support you?
I think under the umbrella of integration, when we call it before, the strategic way of looking at this integration, I think we can each and every department that lives in Under Armour can have a partner in each and every vendor, or we have. So, for example, if we start from the product creation piece and the innovation piece, we do have partners that are making they're making available to us the ability to co-create and to digitally create, and it could be as simple as a sketch that is drawn in the West Coast or in the East Coast in the United States, and it's digitally transformed into a garment from our vendor when they're sleeping, and the next morning they find that garment that looks in a certain way, following best practice that the vendor has, or data points that they agreed to use together. So I imagine that this is one example. The other example, it happens exactly the same for material, the way that materials are co-created and innovated. And again, from supply chain perspective as well. Why do we need to have two planners? Why do we need to have two production monitoring functions? We basically can use production that is holistic, function that is holistic, and supports the needs of both sides. So thinking in partnership is basically the new horizon in how we are actually able to get more done with less, and this is what today partners do. So becoming a partner is becoming more expensive because it requires an investment in understanding the DNA of the brand, because the supplier is not thinking as a supplier, the brand is not thinking as a brand. The new way is to find what common denominator works for both party, and this is why a dedicated team but dedicated skill set, dedicated vision needs to be shared. I remember I was extremely impressed when Patrick Frisk at the Vendor Summit, he went really beyond sharing with our partners our vision into the maximum level of details. And I respect that because this is exactly what is needed from a partner to hear, because by hearing this, they're able to invest and provide solutions instead of be waiting for us to tell them what we need. So proactiveness in this new way of working, it's almost everything, because process can be optimized, but the attitude of being proactive, I think it really what helps us to stay ahead of the game. And if we teach proactiveness across the organization and to our partners, and we make sure that that exists embedded in the people and how they want to work, I think that becomes the new way that we're going after.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point of view. To a great extent, over the years, a lot of the suppliers have invested in better equipment, right? It's always been an investment in better machinery, better technology, which is, of course, very important. Do you feel at this point that now the investment needs to be made in human resources, in developing middle management or people who could work with you and understand that vision better?
Absolutely. And I think I can probably say that it is there. Now more than ever, we are investing in human capital because we know that it takes so much to form competence and to develop competence. So I think it's now more than ever that this is the most important thing for us to focus on.
Oftentimes when we're talking to suppliers and they talk about the value added services they provide to customers, because we'll ask them, what about your company is differentiated from some of your competitors. A lot of it really focuses on the design side of things, that they're able to provide, for example, their own ideas for collections and things like that. Are there other things that you'd like to see them be able to do?
It's part of what I was mentioning before, the integration umbrella. I think, as I said, there is each and every area that exists in Under Armour has a counterpart in our vendor partners, and is able to partner together and really make beautiful things happen.
That ability to be able to work together like that, to almost be seamlessly integrated, right, with your vendors.
Totally. It's the 1 + 1 = 3. That's
right.
The principle that we're following.
It's interesting. The way forward really appears to be much more collaborative rather than who can get the best of the other one.
Absolutely. Totally.
Thank you so much, Luca, for sharing all of this. I mean, really, I have learned so much talking to you, and, it feels so energizing to hear the vision of what you're doing and how much you've been able to achieve at Under Armour.
Thank you so much. It was great being here, and I'm still learning. So perhaps we'll catch up again in the future, and we'll share some more. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll hear the next leg of the journey.
Thank you very much. I agree.
If you enjoyed this episode of A Seat at the Table, join me each week when I sit down with leading executives, entrepreneurs, educators, authors, and innovators who share their insights, experiences, and future vision for business. And make sure to visit Spin Expo. From trend information to technical innovation, Spin Expo is the primary exhibition for yarns and knitwear. The fair provides well-edited forums featuring high-quality products that are bursting with creativity. To learn more, go to spinexpo.com. That's www.spinexpo.com. You can also find a link in the show notes for this episode. Before you go, if you're looking for a concise view of key shifts, opportunities, and risks in global sourcing, then check out the current situation in sourcing. You can find a link in the show notes. And don't forget to check out our new podcast website, where you can find all of the previous episodes of A Seat at the Table podcast, the show notes, plus lots of other useful information. You can find it at www.seat.fm. That's www.seat.fm. FM because it's a podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Jane Singer, and I'll see you in the next podcast episode.